Let's say you want to run a fantasy titterpig where the player characters will have classes that help them feel unique and specialized, the players will feel really empowered, and the rules are so easy you could learn the basics of them so quickly you'll wonder why this video is as long as it is. Well, it sounds to me like you want to know how to play Quest. In it, if you're taking an action that would have interesting consequences for failure, you roll that d20. A roll of a 20 is a triumph where you succeed with extra benefits like double damage or some situational extra like having the minion you were trying to intimidate get so scared they drop an item as they run away. A roll of 11 to 19 is a success, meaning you deal damage on your attack or you, very simply, do the thing. On a 6 to 10, you have a tough choice to make, meaning you do succeed at what you were trying to do, but it comes at a cost in the form of choosing between two setbacks the guide will offer you.
Cake or death? Cake, please.
2 to 5 means you fail at what you were trying to do, with a setback of the guide's choosing.
We're out of cake!
And a 1 is a catastrophe, meaning you fail and there's a big setback. Now, after hearing that concise but brilliantly informative paragraph, you might have a few questions, so let me address them. What's a setback? There isn't a hard and fast list of setbacks, as they should be created to suit the situation, but there are a few you could consider as default options. Losing an item can be a common setback, as can succeeding an attack at the cost of taking damage yourself. On a tough choice result, the player gets to choose between two setbacks that the guide, that's the Quest GM, will offer, like, okay, you hit, but you either only do half damage, or you do full damage and the enemy counterattacks you dealing damage. Half damage on an attack is a pretty standard setback. Notice how neither of the setbacks is you do no damage, but because a tough choice is still a success at what you were trying to accomplish. There may be situations where a guide might want to offer not succeeding as one of the options, but typically that shouldn't be the case. So why does a failure say that you both don't succeed and suffer a setback? Simply put, because things should always be happening. Simply not succeeding at something is kind of boring. Oh, I rolled to pick the lock. I rolled a 5. Oh, you fail. Okay, I guess I try again? I guess. Boo! How about you don't pick the lock and people hear you trying? Uh-oh! Or take combat. If you attack an enemy and simply fail to hit, that's it. That's just kind of disappointing. But if rolling a fail also means you might lose your weapon or get put in a dangerous position or the enemy deals damage to you, that's at least interesting. Things are happening. Failing is good, but it could be better. And before you say, well, that's unfair, hey, enemies have to roll too. They can fail, meaning if an enemy fails to hit you, you can just up and damage them too. No roll needed. Ooh, look at that. Suddenly battles are moving a little faster because things are always happening. Okay, but what if the enemies fail less because they have bigger modifiers to their rolls? Well, I have some good news that some of you will insist is bad news because there are no modifiers in Quest. You aren't going to be adding stuff to your rolls in this game. You roll that d20, and that little chart right there, that's it. Your character sheet is composed of descriptors that flesh out your character, but they don't affect your rolls. You essentially always have a 75% chance to succeed to some degree. I know that upon hearing this, some of you are ready to write Quest off, but I promise, between tough choices and abilities, which we're getting to, this system of success and failure and choosing setbacks feels good. Now, before I explain abilities, let's see what else is on this old character sheet. Well, you got hit points, of which you have 10. Every PC has 10, and that's probably all you will ever have. Does not increase. It just works. We'll talk about why in the combat section. Adventure points! You start with 10, and they are what we use to power your roll's abilities. And that is where your character gets to feel unique and really shine. Rolls and their abilities. In Quest, there are 8 roles, what some weird lesser-known games might refer to as classes. Your role very simply determines what abilities you can obtain. That's it. Obviously, just the names give you an idea of what kind of abilities they get, so choose your role and then, to start with, 6 abilities from that role which are laid out in learning paths. You can start by choosing whatever non-legendary abilities you want, but you have to gain abilities in a learning path in order. So you can't take the Gale ability in the Naturalist Stormcaller learning path until you've learned Cloud Call and Vortex first. Otherwise, you can choose whatever abilities you want, aside from legendary abilities which are awarded through play typically later into a campaign, in a meaningful way, like your character achieves some milestone in their arc where it would make sense to give them that ability. Wow, look at that, narrative and mechanics working together. Now, you'll see that next to an ability is a little arrow and a number. That is how many adventure points it costs to use the ability. Remember those? Now, some abilities have multiple arrows, which means you can choose any one of those effects to use, and sometimes you might have to pay the cost of the first part of an ability and use the second part as a modifier, like the Doctor's Sleep ability, where you have to pay 2 to use it, and then can pay additional adventure points to affect more minions. Multi-part abilities should each make sense in context. Just read them. Now, here's my favorite part about abilities. Notice that some abilities specifically have the text, "roll the dice," most often with an associated roll table for results, though sometimes just using the default roll table to determine success. Now, those are great, but what about the rest of the abilities? How do you determine if they succeed? Hey, want to know a secret? They always succeed. Yeah. If you're an invoker and you cast Thunderous Word, those 3 enemies that are near you are getting knocked back, take 2 damage, and can't use special abilities next turn. You don't roll to do it. Enemies don't get to roll to resist. You just do it. You want to know why? Because you paid for results, and moreover, say it with me,
things should always be happening!
You see, those 10 adventure points you start with, you don't get those back by taking a nap. The only way you get more adventure points is by beating a fairly major enemy, hitting a quest milestone, and you get 5 at the start of every session. And hopefully your guide will be nice and reward them here and there for good roleplay. When you consider the fact that sure, lots of abilities only cost 1 or 2 AP or are even free, some cost 5, 6, maybe even 7 or more, you can burn through those bad boys pretty quickly. If you're going to spend your precious adventure points, you're gonna want results. They are a way for the players to take control, not just get a chance to do something cool. If I had to choose a favorite aspect of this system, this would be it. Some GMs don't like when the players get a little more control, and those GMs are cowards. That's right, come at me! Now, with a lot of the abilities that require a roll, which are maybe 10% of all abilities, some you will still get what you want, but the roll gives a chance for there to be interesting complications. Some are so powerful they have the chance to outright fail, like the Wizard's Teleport ability, which costs 5 AP and can totally fail and potentially even instantly destroy NPCs, which is frankly just amazing and I love it. Incredibly similar to abilities are items. Every character is allowed 12 items, max. Little things like personal effects and whatnot don't take up item slots, just things of importance to the game. So your underwear, not an item slot. Your melee weapon, item slot. A sewing kit, that could actually be important, but maybe not, so ask the guide if you aren't sure and discuss it. Rations might be important in a game with a focus on survival, but not so much in others. Many items have inherent abilities, like the ability to make a camp for your party, making your weapon invisible when sheathed, healing damage, being a weapon but magic, or making a hostile entity calm down. A lot of the other items function just like abilities, some having AP costs and everything, allowing you to make your characters feel more unique and specialized beyond their role. There are no restrictions for who can have an item or any of that. If your wizard finds the Fate Katana, go for it. Be the magical samurai of your dreams. Of course, 12 is the limit, so if you find a new cool item you want, be prepared to drop one, which can be tough because most allow you to do some pretty powerful stuff. Or of course, you may even lose one of those precious items due to a failed roll, and that's the setback. That's all the stuff you need to create and play a character, but well, how do you advance then? Well, depending on the length of your sessions and campaign, that can vary, but the default is that after every 3 to 4 hour session, characters gain 1 new ability. If the campaign is likely going to be longer than 20 sessions, then maybe spread out the advancement to every other session, and if it's going to be a shorter campaign, maybe 2 per session. That is all the advancement that happens, and it's really satisfying. No more, ooh, what do I gain this level? Oh, some HP. That's it. Hooray. Every level is a new ability, and as you might recall, abilities are pretty great. Before we cover combat, do know that there are variant options for characters, where you can allow PCs to have dual roles, where they choose 2 roles and can take abilities from either, but cap off at 25 abilities max, and further abilities gained have to replace old abilities. And then there's playing with no roles, where players can learn from any ability path, but cap out at 20 abilities, because the mix of that many roles can overcomplicate the balance of things. Both of those options are recommended for somewhat more experienced players, but hey, you do you, boo. Finally, let's talk combat. In combat, first, all the player characters get to act in whatever order the guide decides, based on what is happening. Every player gets 1 move and action in a round. Then, all the enemies the guide controls go. Then it's the next round, back to the players, and you get the idea. Players judge what they can do to a foe based on their distance from a foe. If a foe is in reach, you can touch or hit it. If a foe is nearby, well, you can move to be within reach of it during your turn and still take an action. If a foe is in range, you can hit it with a ranged attack or probably spend your whole turn getting in reach of them. If a foe is too far, it's beyond your range and you need to get closer. The book doesn't have any hard rules for folks who want to track this on a battle map, but here are a few ways you can represent this if you don't want to just full-on theater of the mind it and keep track of stuff in your head. You could make a battle map with broader zones, each one representing one of those distance increments. So basically a player can move 1 zone per turn and melee attack within the zone they are in. It's like Fate. If you want to be even more abstract and simplify that, my friend Joel suggested a linear band of zones like this, which might not be realistic, but hey, if it works for Mario, it works for me. So, you're a player, and you do a hit. If you are unarmed or improvising a weapon, you do 1 damage. If you're using a normal weapon, you deal 2 damage. And if it's an ability or special weapon, you do the damage it tells you that you do. Damage on rolled attacks can be doubled or halved by triumphs or tough choices, but otherwise don't really change. Why is that? Well, because health is pretty standard for both players and enemies. Players always have 10 HP, and there are 3 kinds of enemies in Quest with default health and damage values. Commoners, which have 2 HP and do 1 damage on an attack, minions that have 4 HP and do 2 damage, and bosses that have 10 HP and do 4 damage. Now, there are plenty of pre-made enemies from the book, but it's easy to make your own. Just start from the base health and damage, then add features and special abilities of their own to make them interesting and unique and challenging. Features can add health or damage, give an extra attack, extra movement, resistant to damage types, special abilities, and so on. But otherwise, it isn't about enemies getting bigger and bigger numbers, so players have to level up to make their numbers bigger. 4 damage is always a lot of damage. For players, it's 40% of their max health, and for enemies, it's enough to instantly take out all but the tougher baddies. Numbers don't have to get bigger to represent bigger stakes. Just because you've been adventuring for a long time doesn't mean you can inherently take more arrows to the lungs. Note, if you want to come at me in the comments about how HP in D&D isn't actually damage, but an abstracted representation of their ability to avoid lethal blah blah blah, I'm well aware. But that's just as true here in Quest, and in this, it's a heck of a lot easier to keep track of, and also that argument isn't as strong as people say, so come at me! If the enemies clobber your character and knock you down to 0 HP, you are still conscious. You can act. But if you take another hit, you roll a d20 and you need to get higher than the damage you just took, or you're dead. And even if you do roll higher, you still might get knocked unconscious or take on a permanent injury, up to you and the guide. So that means when you're at 0, you can just go, I'm out of here. Or you can see your friends in need and bravely throw yourself into the fray for one big hit, risking your life. Makes a difficult encounter more interesting if you ask me. Now guides, to avoid accidentally throwing too much or too little at your players, how do you figure out combat difficulty? If you add together the enemy's total HP, the most damage they can do in a turn, and the number of enemies, and that number is equal to or more than the party's current combined health, that is a really challenging and potentially deadly fight. If that number is 50 to 80% of the party's health, it's a fair challenge. Sorry, but you gotta do math, and even then, some enemy features might make math look foolish, so you'll learn to use your best judgment. And honestly, that's about it. I know I said a lot of words, but the game is overall really simple. It won't be everyone's cup of tea, and plenty of folks are gonna say stuff like, this is too basic, or characters won't feel unique or special without stats and stuff. I urge you to really consider the possibilities. First, character advancement feels so good because every new ability is meaningful, and items in this game, even the lower tier ones, are capable of doing significant things for the players. Combat moves at a good pace with things always happening, so it's never a slog. Plus, when a game like this has such a basic, solid rule foundation, it is really easy to build on that if you want. It's way easier to homebrew rules for Quest and keep the game balanced than it is for games with a ton of precariously balanced moving parts like, D&D. For instance, let players invoke their virtue or one of their descriptors on their character sheet that would apply to a roll and basically give them advantage, where they roll twice and take the higher of the two rolls, but they can't do that again until they give one of their rolls disadvantage because of their vice or a different descriptor. Or keep track of catastrophes that the group roll, and once they've hit a certain number, let them all pick a quirk, a single ability from a different roll that they can learn. After all, catastrophes are really bad things happening, so the players learn from their mistakes. I don't know. It just makes failure less of a bad thing when you tie a reward to it. And with a system like this, it's easy to implement extras like that. Anyway, play this game. You can get into it so quickly it's kind of ridiculous, and yet it has enough going for it that it can support a big ongoing campaign. Also, if you like this video, do the YouTube things. I'm working on more and more videos, though I'd love to hear what interests you all more. Do you want to learn more systems? Do you want more unscripted videos that give first impressions on systems and VTTs? Should I finally start my Titter Pig talk show? Let me know. There's no more script. It's done now.